Hi, my name is Kenneth Paul, and this is my woodworking shop. It's a genuine pleasure to have you here. I make these videos to share with you the woodworking projects and techniques from here in my shop. Today's project is using 2 jigs to make boxes from pieces of crown molding. These are wonderful little boxes. They make great presents. They're inexpensive to make. They sell well at craft fairs. They don't require much in the way of equipment. They don't require much in the way of material. I'm going to walk you through the process from start to finish on making the box. I'm going to show you a couple of boxes first, and then we'll make one so that you're set up to make one yourself. All right, let's get to it. Here are some examples of boxes made from different pieces of crown molding. This box was made from this piece of crown molding. This box was made from this simple piece of crown molding. This box was made from 2 different pieces of crown molding, a cherry crown molding for the base and a piece of maple crown molding for the top, and then I just used 3 different pieces of wood to make the handle. This large box in the back was made from that large crown molding. This box was made from this paint grade piece of crown molding. This is about as big a piece of crown molding as the jigs I'm going to show you how to make can handle, about 4 5/8 inches. If you want to use bigger crown molding, you just will make your jigs a little bit bigger. Now, these pine boxes right here, this one, this one, this one, and this one, were all made from the exact same piece of molding. The only difference in their shape is how they were positioned in the jig. I'm going to show you how to make whichever shape you want, what happens when you change their position in the jig, how you can go from a more splayed out side to a more vertical side just by changing its position, how you can go from a flatter top to a more upright top, also just by changing their position in the jig. The nice thing about this system is you never have to know what angle you're cutting at. You never have to set the jig at any one angle. Once you place, you'll see in a moment, at no point do you have to know what angle you're cutting anything at. It makes these really quick and easy to make. All right, let me show you the jigs and let's get started. Okay, the first thing we need to do is to cut up some little pieces of crown molding. For the size box I'm going to make right now, I'm going to cut 4 pieces at 11, 4 pieces at 8. Let me turn the dust collector on. Okay, let me show you the jigs and then we'll get started. Alright, this is the first jig that we'll be using. This is the jig that cuts the base of those boxes. It's just a simple square box. it attaches to your miter gauge. I'm using an incro miter gauge, so I just slid it right into the T-track with a couple of square nuts. If you have a standard miter gauge, you would just screw it right in, and that would be that. Now the dimensions on this, these top pieces, these are 18 inches long by 2 5/8 tall. The bottom piece is a piece of 1/8 inch plywood. You don't want to use quarter if you can avoid it, because you need all the blade height you can get. This piece measures 15 3/4 by 6 3/8. This top piece is 6 3/8 by 4 1/2. And what you're going to do is you're going to, at just past the edge of that 15 3/4 inch board, you're going to run it through up against your blade tilted to 45. Actually, I don't tilt my blade at 45. I use an angle cube to set my blade at 45.3 degrees. I always go a little bit over 45 to make sure that my outside corners are nice and tight. I'd rather be a tiny bit over than a tiny bit under 45 degrees. All right. Let me show you how this works. It's extremely simple. Whatever side of this molding that you put up, let me show you the two different differences here. On this box, on the base, this part of the molding with the cove in it is up. On this box, that little cove is down. We're going to be cutting them cove up. Whatever side you put up inside your box, that's going to be the top of your box. And again, like I said, once the saw is set at 45 and you have this, I don't care what angle this is at. I just set this at an angle this is the top of my blade. As long as I'm below this, it'll cut it. For this case, you just make yourself a spacer. I'm using a 2 5/16 inch spacer for this. Not that it really matters, it could be anything. But I put my spacer in. Now that spacer is holding this piece of crown molding at this angle. Doesn't matter what the angle is, whatever you cut the spacer at. If you cut the, let me get the spacer out of there. If you lay this down more, you'll end up with a very much more upright box. The more you stand this up, the more splayed out the side of your box is going to be. All right, let me put my spacer back in. Make sure I'm down against it. All right, now we're going to cut one angle on two 11-inch pieces and one angle on two 8-inch pieces for right now. And then we'll set them for width, for length I should say. All right, let me get set up. All right, we're set for our first set of cuts. I'm going to turn the dust collector on. We'll make those 4 cuts. Doesn't matter which way. Now, we have our first angle. Again, doesn't matter what the angle is. Whatever, as long as we use the same block, we're fine. All we're going to do is take our spacer block from the back of the box, move it to the front of the box. That's it. Now, again, make sure we're still placing it the same way, cove up. Now we're set to make the second cut. I'm going to make this box, I believe, 9 5/8. So let me make a mark here at 9 5/8. Anywhere around there is good. And we know the saw is resting right against this, so if I put my pencil mark right on that slope, we know we're going to cut right there. Now I'm going to take a block, need a slightly taller block. Use one of these. I'm going to use that as a stop block so I cut both pieces the same. This way we don't have to measure again. Again, we moved our spacer to the inside and we moved our piece of crown molding to the back instead of the front. Now let's do our other 2 cuts for the sides. Alright, the 2 sides of a box are cut. Now we're going to cut the 2 ends. I'm going to make those 6 1/8. I'll show you in a little bit how I come up with that particular measurement. What I like to do is once I've determined what the end is going to be, I multiply the end times 1.61, and that's what I use for the sides of the box. That creates a golden rectangle. It creates a very pleasing rectangle whenever you have a ratio of 1 to 1.61. So we're going to place our block in right on the edge. We're going to move our stop block. Short position. All right, we're going to make our next 2 cuts. Now, we have our four sides. We need to put a base in these. Now to put a base in, I just use a piece of 1/8 inch plywood. So I need to make a 1/8 inch slot in these. Let me show you how we're going to do that. All right, what we need now is we need to take the angle that we're going to cut our slot. We're going to need to put a bottom in these boxes. The bottom goes inside of a slot. It comes in at an angle. The angle couldn't be easier. Again, at no point do we know what an angle is. It doesn't matter. Whatever angle we just cut this at, we set our square at that angle, and then we set our blade at that angle. The blade tilting towards the fence. If you have a left tilting saw, you'll put your fence on the left of the blade. I have a right tilting saw. For this, my fence will be on the right of the blade. Again, we take our angle from a piece we just cut, transfer that angle to our blade, and because we're putting feet on these boxes, we want to come about from the tip, start about 1 inch shy is where you want to start that slot. You want to set the depth of the slot a little bit past halfway the thickness of wherever it ends up being. So about half the thickness, maybe a little bit more than the thickness of the board in that part. And again, you'll want the top against the fence. So we used that cove as the top. So we put that cove on the top, and we'll want that slot about 1 inch shy up from this bottom. Now we're just going to run all 4 pieces to make that slot. One moment, problem with the dust collector. All right, dust collector's back online. Glasses. We've got a push block. These are the 4 pieces we just cut. And again, top against the fence. Will fit in there really tight. You don't want to be that tight. You want a little bit of wiggle room. So what we're going to do is we're going to shift our fence over just a 32nd of an inch or so. And then we just pass them again. put them together. All right, now we need a piece of 1/8 inch plywood for the bottom. We just measure the bottom of the slot. In this case, we want a piece about 7 5/16 by 3 3/4 strong. Oh, look what we have. And there you have it. That's the bottom of our box. All the joints fit perfectly, and we never once had to measure an angle. The bottom fits perfectly, and again, making that 1/8 inch a little bit loose gives you plenty of freeway in case you were off a little bit or the molding had a little bit of warp to it. All right. Now, let me show you how I cut the legs on these, because that would be the next step. All right, to lay out the feet on a box this size, I come in about 1 1/8 from each side, and I go up about 3/4 of an inch. Remember, we want to stay below our slot, which we made at 1 inch. In this case, I'll be using a 1 inch sanding drum. So I just put the drum on the 1 1/8 mark and let it hit the 3/4 mark. And just put a rough line. Again, doesn't have to be too exact. The sander is going to make it exact for you. There. That's our layout. What I would do now is I would take this over to the bandsaw with a small blade. You can use a scroll saw, coping saw, anything you want. Just cut a little bit outside of that line. Leave yourself a little bit, because what's going to happen to make this all even and to make a perfect line, we're going to use our oscillating sander. You could also use a drill press with a drum in it. I'm just using an oscillating sander. Let me show you how. Okay. Once I've gone over to the bandsaw or scroll saw or coping saw and I've roughed out my opening, all I do is I take a fence with a little cutout on it and I set it where it's not quite touching the fence. Then all I've got to do the sander straightens our line out for us, straightens our curve out for us, and gives us a very attractive leg. All right, our base is done. Let's move on to making the top. All right, this is the second jig you need. This is the jig that makes the top of the boxes. I've returned the blade back to 90 degrees. It's just a 1/2 inch plywood base. This base is 16 inches by 22 inches. some pieces of 2x4, 12 inches long, 3 inches tall, cut with a 45 joint, set square to your table and blade. Over here we have a 5-inch block that's just a safety block for the blade to run into while you're working. And then you've got a couple of 1-inch by 14-inch, 3/4-inch stock spacers that are, hang on, 4 3/4 inches apart. So you got a 4 3/4 inch spacing. Once you have these two 2x4s on, you just cut yourself a 4 3/4 inch spacer because you want these to be parallel with this. All right. And again, same as the base. We don't really know what angle anything is going to be set at. It doesn't matter. The angle we have to use for the top to fit, that's what these lines are here. That's the only math you're going to have to do, really. And it's not hard. It's A minus B plus C. I'll show you what I mean. All right. For setting the position of the top into the other jig, you take your assembled base. You're going to take 3 measurements from this base. Decide if you're going to put your top cove up or cove down. In this case, I've decided to go cove up. So you're going to hold a piece of scrap in position, and you're going to measure from the bottom of the box to the top of that molding. In this case, it's 3 1/4 inches. So you can write down 3 1/4. That'll be measurement A. Measurement B will be the depth of the box itself. The depth of this box is 1 9/16. That's B. C is, there's an angle here. There's a little bit of a space right here. We need to know what the space is from here to here. Easiest way to do that is put a straight edge across, take your combination square, just butt it to where that just hits. Then take your reading. And that's about 1/8 of an inch. So measurement A to the top of the molding is 3 1/4. Measurement B from the top of the box to the bottom of the box is 1 9/16. Measurement C, the little gap over here, is 1/8. Now we're going to do A minus B plus C. So 3 1/4 minus 1 9/16 plus 1/8 gives us 1 13/16. That's the height we're going to hold the top on the second jig. Let me show you. All right, so we just determined that the height we need to hold at is 1 13/16. We rip a little block, make ourselves a pencil line, and again, I want this to be cove up, so we hold the piece of molding cove up right against that line. Then we measure to see how big a spacer we need. In this case, 2 1/4. So I have a 2 1/4 inch spacer here. Oops, no I don't. That's not my spacer. Oh, here's my 2 1/4 inch spacer. All right, we have a 2 1/4 inch spacer, and by holding that block, the piece of crown molding against that stop, that puts us right on the 1 13/16 mark that we want to be at. This is the angle that the top needs to be on to sit on top of that lid. All right, we're going to cut one angle on all 4 pieces, then move to the other side. All right, let's get those 4 cut. All right. Now, let's see if we can focus here. We're going to take our piece, we're going to hold it up against our base and go from corner to corner, make a mark. That's the length of the sides. We do the same thing here. We go from corner to corner. And that's going to be the length of the ends. Now all we're going to do is take our spacer, we're going to move it to the right side. Take one of the pieces we just marked, and we're just going to move it to where that mark just touches inside of the curve. Okay. You don't want to go much smaller than, what did we make this, 6 1/8. You can go down to 5 3/4 or so. If you go to make these much smaller, what happens is you don't have much wood to register against your fence. You'd have to put a sacrificial fence over here, and that would change your readings. Just so you're aware. So I don't generally make them smaller than 6 1/8. All right. Stop block in place so we don't have to do any more measuring. No measuring. Now, we need to set up to cut the kerf on the top in order to have the top put on. Let me show you how that's done. Now, to set the angle to cut the slot for the top, you're going to hold a little scrap of the crown molding. Again, the same position it's going to be when you put it together, so this take cove up. Just put a little block of wood against it. Hold it in that position. This is the angle you want. This is the angle your blade's going to be set at. So we're going to take our square, we're going to set it at that angle, then set the saw blade at this angle. Let me show you. Last time we tilted the blade towards the fence. This time we're going to set the blade to tilt away from the fence. Because I have a right tilting saw, it means I need to bring the fence onto the left side of the blade. Let me show you. All right. We've set the saw blade at the angle we determined. I've added a sacrificial fence to my Weissmeyer fence because the blade comes up right against the fence. So you'll have to add a little block. These little clamps to do this, you can get them anywhere on Amazon, whatever, for just a few dollars. They're very cheap. What you're going to do is run the top down with the back against the fence. That's going to give you the slot that your 1/8 of an inch top is going to slide in, just the way you did the bottom. Let me show you. Now when you're going to run these small pieces, they're not very balanced. Take a scrap, put a piece of scrap behind it. Now you can safely run that. Take your scrap piece, put it right behind it. Just like we did before, we're going to move our fence. And we're going to run them again. Yep. You want that little bit of wiggle room. Try to run these by themselves. Put a backer block on it. Run it in. Take it back out. Same thing, we measure our 1/8 of an inch top. In this case, about 1 3/8. By 5 1/8, which we happen to have. That's the scrap piece there. Corners, and there we go. There is our top. And you can glue anything you want in here for handle. We'll go over that again in a little bit. Let me show you how I glue these up, and then we'll go over how I determine what width I'm going to use on these, because what I do is I determine the width of the sides, these ends, by how big I want this opening to be. I'll show you how I do that in just a moment. First, let's go over how to glue these up. All right, for glue up, couldn't be simpler. Just take a piece of scrap plywood, some strips. I screw down 2 strips at 90 degrees, button my pieces against it. Put my glue in first, obviously. Put my pieces up against it. And I screw the other spacers up against there to lock her in place. I'll take a couple of small clamps. You get these itty bitty little clamps for a buck and change over at Harbor Freight. I find they're handy little things to have. That's it. Make sure she's pressed down good. Then up against the plywood, going to give you a nice flat surface. Now, on the top, sometimes it's easier to do a slightly different method. I'll show you. Sometimes you'll just take a board, put a board across the top, clamp this board down. And this will also put pressure on all four sides. But that's the clamping procedure. It's not anything that's very difficult to do. A few screws, a few scraps of wood, clamps if you want, and if not, a strip across the top, a couple of clamps. Because they're at an angle, it'll pull everything together. Alright, obviously I haven't cut the legs out of this one yet. Let me show you how I determine the length of my ends. One moment. Okay. Once I have two angles cut, I just hold those two angles. I take a piece of scrap, hold the scrap in the position. Oops. Yeah, man. Hold the scrap in the position you want. Mate those two angles. Yeah, man. Fingers are dry, they're not gripping anything. There we go. And then I'll measure from the outside edge to this edge, straight face, sighting straight down. In this case, it's about 2.5 inches. Which tells me if I made this end 5 inches, this would touch. I want to have a space here. So we make it, instead of making it 5 inches, we make it 6 1/8. That gives us our space. The more I come across, the bigger space we're going to have. That's how I determine my space. Once I have the space for this side, I multiply this end, whatever the measurement, in this case 6 1/8, I multiply it times 1.61, and that gives us our length, and that gives us our pleasing rectangle. That's the golden rectangle, a ratio of 1 to 1.61. Okay. Now, let me show you something real quick. All the information that I just showed you on this video all comes from an old issue of Wood Magazine. And what was the year on this? March of 1998. So March of 1998, Wood Magazine. All the jigs, all the information on the angles, everything is in there. You should have enough information from this video, but if not, pick up an old back issue of Wood Magazine. I believe they're available online. All right. I hope you found this video useful. I hope you make some of these boxes. They make wonderful presents. Again, instead of just giving a gift card this Christmas, give a gift card in a little wooden box. Once you set up, if you don't want to make different boxes, you just want to make the same box, you can make an awful lot of these boxes for cheap. This pine crown molding is $2.98 for an 8-footer. That's what it is on my end, at least. I get a box and a half out of each one. That means each one of these pine boxes only costs $2. It's hard to go wrong. Same thing if you want to sell them at craft fairs. You only have $2 of material in this. All right. Again, if you like the content I'm producing, do me a favor. Subscribe, hit like, leave a comment. If you have any questions, ask. I'll answer them. All right. You have yourself a good day. Bye-bye.